All right, so for part two of the law school application review, I really want to take some time to look more closely at the personal statement, to look at the diversity statement, as well as to look at the addendum. So, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to go through the personal statement and give you a sense of what things I would really be paying attention to or taking note of if I were reading this, and do the same thing for the diversity statement as well as for the addendum. But for the personal statement, many of you know I have a free personal statement rubric offered on my page. So just at my homepage, go there. You can download the free personal statement rubric, which is really useful for you and other students to use as you're trying to figure out, whether or not your personal statement is decent. What I will say is that if you ever get a personal statement review from me, I will probably be a bit more stringent when reviewing your personal statement than might be the case, when actually reviewing an application. And the reason being is that your personal statement is often used for several things. The main thing that your personal statement is used for is for the admissions committee to get a good sense of who you are, why you want to go to law school, why you want to become a lawyer. So that is the basic purpose of your personal statement. And so as long as you have answered the question within your personal statement, or as long as you know the admissions committee knows by the time they are done reading your personal statement why you want to go to law school, what led you to this point, then you have done it correctly, and that is sufficient. However, when I'm reviewing your personal statement, what I am aware of is that your personal statement can be used for more than just getting you into law school. Your personal statement can be a powerful tool when a school is deciding how much scholarship money to give you or whether or not to give you scholarship money, to be honest. And so, even though your personal statement really just has to be decent and answer, that basic question in order to get into law school, a really strong personal statement can make the difference between, thousands of dollars being thrown at you or not. So when I'm reviewing personal statements as, a service, when I'm critiquing it and, giving you suggested edits, I'm really looking at it from the lens of I don't want you just to get into law school. I want you to get into law school with a scholarship. However, or I want you to get into law school and be one of the people that a law school admissions committee says, I really want them. I'm going to fight for them, if push comes to shove. So, however, for the purposes of this mock application review, I am going to be a bit milder in my review of the personal statement. I really just want to know why this person wants to go to law school. And so the rubric that I use after this, that really just assesses, whether or not they did the personal statement correctly, is really coming from that lens. I really just want to know, did they do the personal statement in a way that was sufficient, for the purposes of the application? So, all right. One of the things to point out about this personal statement is that it is 3 pages long. Many schools do not accept a 3 page personal statement. For some schools, you really have to have your personal statement 2 pages long. And so, if we do a personal statement review, or if I do a personal statement review for you and you give me a 3 page personal statement, that's perfectly fine. What I will likely do is make suggestions about what you should likely cut out if you do need to transform it into a 2 page personal statement to fit, some of the other schools that you apply to. But for the purpose of this application, we are going to believe that it is okay, it is sufficient for, the student to have a 3 page personal statement. So let's just go ahead and read through this. Again, personal statement, what I want to know is why do you want to go to law school? Actually, before I review this personal statement, let me actually go down to the rubrics just so that you have a sense of what some of the things you should be mindful of, what some of the things are that you should be mindful of when you're writing your personal statement. So, for starters, your personal statement needs to be easy to summarize. Yes, I want to know why you want to go to law school, but I need to be able to put that again. I think I said in either the last video or the very first video that I did that essentially the admissions committee's job is to take like a 30-page application and condense it down to one paragraph. And so, in order for me to condense your application down to one paragraph when I'm explaining it to others, I need to be able to put, just in layman's terms, what your personal statement was about. So, something that I can write in about a sentence or so. So, that is one thing that needs to be clear. Like, it needs to be summarizable. So, that's one thing that your personal statement needs to have. Another thing is, in order to make it summarizable, it's really important that you stick to one or maybe two main topics or themes. You don't want to throw a lot at the admissions committee. You don't want to throw, everything that has ever happened in your life into your personal statement in this way that is very disjointed, because that makes it harder to summarize your personal statement. It also makes it harder for you to really shine in your personal statement. We also want your personal statement to be honest. So you need to be sincere, maybe vulnerable, definitely authentic. The admissions committee needs to really learn something new about you that they would not have learned elsewhere. So, this does not need to be just a, summary or recitation of your resume. It needs to be something that truly is personal. It also needs to be about you. It does not need to be about, too many other people. It needs to be about you. You want to avoid cliches. You don't want to say things that, sound impressive but that really aren't. I always want to go to Anderson Law School because it's the best in the country. You know, that's not really substantive enough. That's not what schools want to hear. So don't feel like, you need to say things that schools want to hear just because. It needs to follow the page limits. And when following page limits, that also means making sure that your font size and your margins are standard. So, you don't want to play with your font size or your margins in order to get it within the page limits. Your content, again, you want to be authentic. You want to tell a story that is worth the admission committee's time. So you want to make sure that you're really talking from a place of vulnerability, authenticity, that really just paints a picture of why it is, what led you to this point in your life. And you want to make sure that you're not being boring, that you're writing in a persuasive storytelling manner, and that you have good writing, just in terms of grammar, syntax, flow, etc. So your writing quality needs to be good. So those, just off the bat, are all the things that you want to keep in mind when you're writing your personal statement. And now, as we read through this person's personal statement, let's just, go ahead and talk about it a bit more. If you took the quiz at the beginning of this lesson, then something that or at the beginning of this course, then something that is that an admissions committee really only spends about 15 minutes per application reviewing the application. And so I say that to say that when it comes to things like your personal statement, imagine that we are reading through this really quickly. So as I kind of go through this personal statement, I want to go through it in the same speed that I probably would go through it if I were actually reading this in real life. And I want to just name out some of the things that really stand out. So we're just going to go ahead and speed through this. Forgive me, but it probably would be, sped through if this was actually being reviewed by admissions committee. All right. Person believes they were born to be a civil rights attorney, grew up in Birmingham, lots of remnants of the civil rights movement, admires people like Angela Davis, Dr. King, Malcolm X, admires the Civil Rights Act of 1964, believes in continuing the legacy of social justice, had many obstacles in life, grew up in foster and kinship care. Her mother was in an abusive relationship, spent time in the courtroom as a child. At her kindergarten graduation, remembers having to give a speech where she said she wanted to be a lawyer. Fast forward to college, she was a first-generation college student, was a nursing major because that's what her family wanted of her, didn't do well in nursing, felt like there were barriers while she was in college, had more difficult circumstances. Her mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, changed her major from nursing to social work, decided that she really wanted to follow her dreams instead, then began pursuing other areas of interest for her, got into some advocacy work, start to realize the laws and the way that they impact people of low socioeconomic status. That inspired her to start thinking about what to do next. All of these experiences were building her or leading to her becoming an attorney, but immediately after college, she joined the AmeriCorps, worked in a rural community in Florida, worked with issues related to poverty, immigration reform, education disparities. That was a good learning experience for her. At a leadership conference, became familiar with Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. realized her passion again was growing, and that's when she ultimately decided that was time for her to apply to law school. She's done work that has allowed her to advocate for people or assist them as they were going through the court system, specifically domestic violence victims. And so her current goal now is to get a law degree, a joint law degree, and MSW degree, so master's in social work degree. So reading through that, essentially my key takeaway, why does this person want to go to law school, is really that they've always wanted to be a civil rights lawyer and has had all these life experiences that really just led to and supported that decision. Did this person stick to a theme? There was kind of a lot thrown at you, but for the most part, it made sense. The person kind of took you through a chronological look at their life. I wouldn't necessarily say that this would be an approach I would recommend to students. I would probably recommend that students be a bit more concise if I was doing a personal statement, review with you. However, for the purposes of getting into law school, this is actually sufficient. I don't think I read this thinking, whoa, like you're all over the place. She did a pretty good job of like weaving the story chronologically, which not everybody does when they have a lot of different pieces like this. Definitely came off as sincere and vulnerable and authentic. She shared some parts of her story that I'm sure she doesn't share often with people. She probably doesn't walk down the street just letting everyone know, that she grew up in foster and kinship care, or that, her mother was in an abusive relationship, or that, she's done these different types of work where she's advocated for, domestic violence survivors, and all of these things kind of led to her wanting to be an attorney. So I'm sure she doesn't like share that with everyone, but it is useful that she shared that with the admissions committee because it gives a bit of intel about what drives her, what motivates her, and what she's passionate about. For the most part, she did not use cliche. She did use a variation of the "I've always wanted to be a lawyer" cliche, but it really came off as sincere and genuine, and it was embedded into the story of, having to give a speech as a kindergartner, after, going through these court experiences at a very young age. And so it really came off as authentic. So she used it well. She definitely followed the page limits if she had a, 3-page limit, which for purposes of this mock application review, we are imagining that she did. However, if this were an application where she could only give a 2-page personal statement, there are definitely some paragraphs that would recommend, she takes out. She can take out, some of the information about, being an AmeriCorps volunteer, in part because if you recall, we got that information from her letter of recommendation yesterday. So that's something that her supervisor told us about. She can also probably take out some information about why she changed her major, and some of the things that she did in undergrad in terms of advocacy work or organization she got involved with, because the major changing her major and her grade point changing, that's something that she could include in an addendum. So that's another way she could work that in. The information about working at or being involved with these different organizations, that could be highlighted in her resume. And if she wanted, she could take out the story about her mother, or her being in kinship care, as well as foster care, and her mother being in an abusive relationship. That's something, if she wanted, she could fit into her diversity statement instead. And she could still work in the story about always wanting to be a civil rights attorney, giving this speech as a kindergartner, and some of these other pieces. And that would probably make this all fit within 2 pages if she definitely had to make this fit within 2 pages. So when people do have 3-page letters or 3-page personal statements, there are pretty easy ways oftentimes that it can be condensed to 2 pages, often by just figuring out what is another area in the application that this information can go in. All right. So, all in all, for this personal statement, there definitely weren't any grammatical errors or syntax or flow errors that I noticed. The story was, it definitely wasn't boring. And so, kept my attention, and, they made a good use of their space. So, this personal statement wasn't a problem. It definitely would be sufficient to get them into law school without, any eyebrows being raised. Again, if this were a personal statement, though, that I would be working on someone with, this score might be a bit different. I might be a bit more stringent or harder, in part because I wanted to make sure that, the personal statement comes off a bit more powerful. But that's okay. This was a really good personal statement for the purposes of getting into school. Um, and then with regard to diversity statement, your diversity statement really should focus on, any hardships you've overcome, any unique experiences or perspectives that you would bring to a law school classroom. And so this applicant, my friend again, decided to focus her diversity statement on, well, it looks like starting off about, being a Fulbright scholar and, working in Indonesia. So she talks a bit about that experience, being culturally diverse and the experience that, she went through in terms of having a LSAC waiver, not having the money to pay for the LSAT, and, having the opportunity to get an LSAT waiver, the trouble that she went through studying for the LSAT. Um, and also, feeling defeated as she was studying for the LSAT until she found examples of, people who were trailblazers that helped her feel positive, and inspired to persevere. So while this is okay for a diversity statement, it does highlight, that she has um, a level of resilience, that, she came from a lower socioeconomic background. The truth is, if she really wanted to, she could have focused her diversity statement on all of these things, as well as on, the things that I talked about a moment ago with her personal statement. So her childhood and being raised by her family, instead of her mother, her biological mother. And so it's perfectly fine that she chose to write her diversity statement about these things. But the good thing about the diversity statement is that if you really want to, you can make it a bit more personalized to your hardships in life, or you can make it a bit more general like this, where you talk about, the diversity or your ability to be in diverse environments, to thrive in those environments, and how you've demonstrated that in the past. So your diversity statement, you have options. All right, so in the first video, we talked a bit about the transcript and how not the transcript, the CAS report, and how the law school report specifically shows some discrepancies in GPA, just for the students like second year of school. And so if you are someone who, has dips or ebbs and flows in your transcript, then it is really easy to write a grade explanation that basically just explains, why your grades were low. For Jaleesa in the personal statement that we just read, I made mention of the fact that she talked about why her GPA fluctuated, but that is something that easily could have gone into this grade explanation section of an addendum. And so it is perfectly fine to be honest and say that you are a first generation college student that struggled with, college when you first got there, or that you had to seek out resources or support, or that you had a major that, you weren't necessarily passionate about, that you later decided to change, or that, something happened in your life. A family member maybe was ill, or, a family member had a life circumstance like a job loss that really impacted you because you support your family, or you had to support your family. Or maybe you had to support yourself. Maybe you had to work a job or two just to pay tuition and rent. And so basically, oftentimes students, especially underrepresented minority students, don't take advantage of their opportunity to provide context about why their grades were the way that they were. And the same goes for an LSAT, why their LSAT score was the way that it was, in part because underrepresented minority students often feel like they are making excuses for themselves. And so what I want you just to take away from being able to read this great explanation and this LSAT explanation is that there are no excuses when you are applying to law school. It is providing context. Without you providing that context, a school is not going to know. They are not going to make assumptions that, your mother was sick, or that you struggled with school because you were first gen. That is information that they are only going to know if you tell it to them. I want you to think of a law school admissions officer as your own attorney or advocate, before the law school admissions committee, right? And so the only way that they can make the case for you in terms of, grades and other extenuating factors is if you give them the facts, if you give them the information that they need to make that case for you. And so if you have a low GPA one semester, but it's because something happened, tell them what happened. If you have a low overall GPA, but your major but that's because your first 2 years or your first year you didn't do well because you didn't know how to be a good college student. But by the time you got into your major, in your last couple of years of school, you were consistently doing much better. Point that out. Even though they may see that in your transcript, they may have missed it. So you spelling it out, make sure that they have, the tools that they need to advocate for you. The same goes for the LSAT. If there is a discrepancy in your LSAT score, so if you at any point have about a 4-point difference in your highest LSAT score and your lowest LSAT score, a 4-point difference or more, you need to explain why that is. The reason being, as you see on the CAS report, there is something called score bands. So essentially, whenever there's an LSAT score, so let's say that you got a 158, this LSAT band that may have been next to that was possibly like 156 to 160. Essentially, what LSAC does is LSAC makes these predictions that someone who got a 158 could have easily gotten a 156 or a 160 anywhere within that 4-point window. So if you are outside of a 4-point window, the assumption is that this is an irregularity. And so if it's an irregularity, then there becomes a red flag of which score do I trust? Why is there an irregularity? What happened? And so you want to go ahead and be proactive and offset any questions that may arise by simply explaining what happened that attributes to your score difference. So in this LSAT explanation, essentially what this person explains is that the second time they took the LSAT exam, they had a cold, so they were sick. The third time they took the LSAT exam, it was during this new COVID virtual setting where the LSAT flex was required. And their testing environment just wasn't quiet. They live with family members. They have, a rambunctious toddler in the house. And so, it's not a good representation of their testing abilities or how they'll do in law school. So those are the sorts of things that honestly you need to make sure you are proactive about doing, basically explaining and providing context if there is a reason or justification for why your grades or your LSAT score are not at the level where you think that it could or should have been. So that is all for this second part of the application review. And what comes next is I will actually show you an example of what my 1-paragraph notes would look like for the whole CAS report and application together. So stay tuned. That's coming up next.